Secondly, there is the international dimension. With respect to Colombia, such involvement is needed, not only in the name of peace or as a means of increasing investment and trade, but also so we can wage a more effective international campaign against a terrible menace, the trafficking in illegal drugs, which poisons lives, corrupt values and institutions, damage the environment, and stand ready to strike at our innocent children. Many of you know the gravity of the issues confronting our nation. I kid you not. This year has been a difficult one, at times extremely so. Upon assuming office, I found that we were in the midst of a storm whose true nature no one had really predicted. Unemployment had doubled. The fiscal deficit had quadrupled, all in only 4 years. The greatest setback, however, was a government that had left the framework of the state weaker than at any time in recent history. But my administration has refused to be overwhelmed by events or given into pessimism. Instead, we are meeting these challenges head-on, guided by clear objectives and realistic expectations that we set for ourselves since day one. Our response is not designed to win popularity contests, but to reactivate and rebuild our country. When I complete my term in the year 2002, Colombia's institution will be healthier and its system of government more capable and fair, not just now, but for the entire life of our nation. Yes, our problems are large, but most of what you have been seeing and hearing in the media is more than the predictable, misleading stereotypes or oversimplified sound bites. Quite frankly, I am greatly alarmed by the glaring and often unsubstantiated inaccuracies with respect to my country, Colombia. Talk of a nation on the brink of collapse or on the verge of becoming a narco-guerrilla state. I am here to tell you that this is absolutely and unequivocally not the case. Similar statements were made a decade ago when Colombia confronted an enormously greater threat to national stability, the terror campaigns of the Medellin drug cartel. We survived then, and we are standing strong now. As I speak, Colombia's armed forces are waging an effective campaign against the insurgent forces. The military setbacks of recent years have been replaced by the military successes of recent weeks. It is the state, not the insurgent, that is gaining ground, and as our soldiers continue to put their lives on the line, they are earning the unqualified respect of our 40 million citizens. We have instituted sweeping military reforms, including mandatory training in human rights with standards above those used even by the US military. We are phasing out conscription in order to build a more professional force. And we have increased intelligence sharing and cooperation between the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. These changes are needed regardless of our international situation, and I remain convinced that we must achieve peace politically. You should remember that what Colombia faces is not by any means a civil war. Less than 20,000 irregular troops, roughly 1/20 of 1% of our population, are not on the verge of doing anything except promoting and prolonging the violence plaguing the countryside and contributing to the chaos produced by drug trafficking. Just last month, I was in the United States, where I addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations, meet with President Clinton and leaders on Capitol Hill. Part of my goal was to dispel such false rumors, but the main reason was to unveil a new and comprehensive Plan Colombia, a four-part strategy aimed at reactivating our economy, forging a lasting peace, stepping up the fight against narco-trafficking, and as the strategy's central piece, its cornerstone, strengthening our government, both locally and nationally. On the economic front, Colombia's record has no peer among Latin American nations. Uninterrupted growth for almost 70 years, an investment-grade rating, relatively low inflation, a proven track record of honoring each and every financial obligation, a strong independent central bank, a stable currency, a tested entrepreneurial spirit, and an economy that has attracted over $13 billion in foreign investment in the last 5 years alone. Impressive, indeed, especially in light of the challenges created by narco-terrorism, an armed insurgency, and regional and worldwide economic crisis beyond our control. Add to this our vast natural resources in oil. 90% of our reserves still remain untapped. Coal and iron ore, nickel and natural gas, precious and semi-precious metals, timber and agricultural products, and it is clear that we have the tools, the resources, and the will not only to weather the storms, but to prosper and grow. Our present circumstances are cause for concern, but not alarm. In fact, the greatest challenge facing Colombia has little to do with insurgency and everything to do with unemployment. Insecurity, anxiety, fear, hunger, these are the greatest threats to our civil society and to our own solvency as a nation. The measures we took early on have begun to kick in, but the medicine we have had to take is harsh and the cure cannot come overnight. But there is no doubt about it. We are already on the road to real recovery. Yet Colombia can do only so much on its own, for in today's globalized economy, nations must work together to stimulate and expand growth, sustain free and fair markets, and create mechanisms to prevent crises like those that struck last year from reoccurring. Such mechanisms are particularly important for nations like Colombia, whose present circumstances have been greatly exacerbated by the international downturn, which have reduced prices for our two principal export commodities, oil and coffee, and sent our entire region into recession. This is why my government is moving ahead in our negotiations with the United States government to secure a long overdue bilateral investment treaty. Above all, we open and actively seek the equivalent of the CBI parity, that is, an agreement similar to the Caribbean Basin Initiative, a trade preference act that benefits many of our Caribbean neighbors doing business with the United States. What Colombia is pursuing is trade, not aid. Our government has the responsibility, and my administration has the necessary will to undertake wide-scale expansion and reform of our own institutions, which as a result has already begun to translate into a healthier and more accountable mechanism of government. And this means more active and sustained citizen participation at the local and the national level. It means providing our institutions with the resources necessary to fulfill their central task, which of course is to serve the people. It means improving infrastructure in those rural areas that were bypassed by early development and where the insurgents operate. It means a better equipped national police force to fight common violence and delinquency and to uncover and dismantle narco-trafficking operations. It means an expanded judicial system so that every case is heard in an impartial court whose rulings can be adequately enforced. And last but hardly least, It means the necessary resources for improving education and health services to guarantee the next generation of Colombians can grow up in an environment of security and peace, able to pursue their dreams. Still, when needed, cuts are being made in public expenditure. When at a cost of $1 billion, we are rebuilding our coffee belt that was devastated by an earthquake in January of this year. And when we ask all Colombians to contribute to our Fund for Peace, allowing us to raise $800 million, we are also at a time in our history when we seek assistance from the international community, in particular from the United Nations, the European Community, and the United States. Such assistance, which I spelled out on my visit last month, is targeted at approximately $1.2 billion a year over the next 3 years, and it is essential if we are to achieve the goals set out in the Plan Colombia. The most talked about area will be that of narco-trafficking, and it is here that the support of every nation and every continent is required. No single issue, with the possible exception of protecting our environment, is so clearly one that affects us all and for which we are all equally responsible. As individuals and as a nation, Colombia has fought tirelessly against the rising tide of narco-trafficking. Many thousands of our best and brightest judges and journalists, politicians, policemen, members of the army have paid the highest price in this war, and the world owes them an incalculable debt of gratitude. We resisted the terror campaigns of the drug cartels that now lay in ruins. Yet, the narcotics trade, one of the world's largest businesses, has continued its assault on our society and our institutions. In Colombia, the cartels of the past have given way to a more fractured and less public industry, making it more difficult to penetrate and break up their operations. Yet, such changes have not softened our determination or weakened our resolve. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we launched a new counter-narcotics battalion designed to meet the new nature of the beast head-on in terms of reducing cultivation and accessing and destroying their transportation networks. This battalion is a direct reflection of our belief that narco-trafficking is the major obstacle to peace, is the worst enemy of peace. Colombia can no longer wage the campaign single-handedly. We must strive toward greater integration with respect to money laundering, which has swept its way into financial institutions across the globe. There must also be a greater determination to fight contraband. As a multinational, the Middle East clearly show if any peace process is to prevail, then the international community must be there to lend its support. For our own part, we Colombians will continue to do everything in our power, allocating every available resource with this end in mind. The world should also remember that this is, after all, a process. It will take time. However, the advances already made warrant greater attention. Larger steps towards peace have been made in these last 15 months than the last decade combined. I have met with the leaders of the FARC, the largest guerrilla group. We have agreed on an agenda for negotiations, and the talks are scheduled to begin by the end of this month. We will start next Sunday. Yet, the process to succeed cannot endure in a vacuum, which is why I have committed myself to diplomatic efforts in the name of peace. It is no secret that the central international partner here is and will continue to be the United States. Since the era of John Quincy Adams and Simon Bolivar, our relationship has stood the test of time throughout difficult trials and as good neighbors in a regional stand against fascism in World War II and in combat in Korea, in an alliance for progress and against the scourge of illegal drugs. I share the opinion expressed by Mr. Baker, who wrote in his memoir, The Politics of Diplomacy. He said, coalitions abroad tend to endure if they are based on shared ideas and purposes. Differences are inevitable, but they need not overwhelm large common causes. The common cause shared by Colombia and the United States point to a coalition that will surely thrive. From our end, my government will continue to work ceaselessly in the face of whatever dangers and difficulties, and despite temporary setbacks, we will continue to work at home and overseas for the triumph of peace, for the defeat of the illegal drug trade, and for an integrated world economy to be sustained and defended by a strong central government dedicated to preserving those values, democracy and the sanctity of human rights, which we hold sacred. In all our efforts, we welcome your continued support and cooperation along the way. Thank you very much. Many of you know the gravity of the issues confronting our nation. I kid you not. This year has been a difficult one, at times extremely so. Upon assuming office, I found that we were in the midst of a storm whose true nature no one had really predicted. Unemployment had doubled. The fiscal deficit had quadrupled, all in only 4 years. The greatest set, or on the verge of becoming a narco-guerrilla state, I am here to tell you that this is absolutely and unequivocally not the case. Similar statements were made a decade ago when Colombia confronted an enormously greater threat to national stability, the terror campaigns of the Medellin drug cartel. We survived then, and we are standing strong now. As I speak, Colombia's armed forces are waging. Secondly, there is the international dimension. With respect to Colombia, such involvement is needed, not only in the name of peace, or as a means of increasing investment and trade, but also so we can wage a more effective international campaign against a terrible menace, the trafficking in illegal drugs, which poisons lives, corrupt values and institutions, damage the environment, and stand ready to strike at our innocent children. Back, however, was a government that had left the framework of the state weaker than at any time in recent history. But my administration has refused to be overwhelmed by events or given into pessimism. Instead, we are meeting these challenges head-on, guided by clear objectives and realistic expectations that we set for ourselves since day one. Our response is not designed to win popularity contests, but to reactivate and rebuild our country. When I complete my term in the year 2002, Colombia's institution will be healthier and its system of government more capable and fair, not just now, but for the entire life of our nation. Yes, our problems are large, but most of what you have been seeing and hearing in the media is more than the predictable, misleading stereotypes or oversimplified sound bites. Quite frankly, I am greatly alarmed by the glaring and often unsubstantiated inaccuracies with respect to my country, Colombia. Talk of a nation on the brink of collapse